It's a bit of a historical day for Perth radio today. I was about to say one of our competitors is leaving the business temporarily, I suspect, but we don't have competitors. I'd say one of our colleagues, Kerry Roberts, he's a familiar name for people who've been around the industry for a while, and lots of people in Perth would know who Kerry is. He was the helm of 96 in the days when they were really popular. And for the past 10 years, and I think it's almost to the day, 10 years, he's been at the helm at 94.5 and more latterly 92.9 FM and done a passingly fair job with them as well. And I've mocked him a bit in the past because he is one of these immaculate people. It's unusual for radio, really. He's immaculately dressed all the time. His hair is always perfect. In fact, it must have been a good 10 years ago, perhaps more. I was walking down Adelaide Terrace one day and I saw Kerry coming in the opposite direction near the Sheraton Hotel. And as he was crossing Hill Street, I thought he had something wrong with his neck because his head was turned to one side. And I checked this out. It turns out the wind was blowing up Hill Street, and it was so his hair wouldn't get messed up, if you don't mind. Looked like he had a crook neck, but his clothes are always immaculate, and the shirt's always beautifully pressed, thus the nickname Guido the Killer Pimp. Well, he's retiring from 94 and 92 today, and I think he's going to have a little time away in Italy, taking a holiday there, and I think he'll probably need to do so after he's heard this little bit of embarrassment. He's very well thought of by his colleagues and his staff. Just take a listen to this. This is a little tribute they've put together for Kerry Roberts.
Kerry Roberts, Kerry Roberts, you're a bastard to go. Kerry Roberts, how we love you, and from all of us at our stereo, we really don't want you to go and want you to know how we love you, Kerry Roberts. And in saying our goodbyes today, we are wishing you well on your way, wherever that is. Kerry Roberts, you're a dream as a boss, not one hair out of place or a whisker on your face. Kerry Roberts, you're the top of the tops, your shirts are just so neatly pressed, you're always so divinely dressed. Kerry Roberts, how we love you, and we really don't want you to go. So from all of us at our stereo, we want you to know, Kerry Roberts, you're the cream of MDs, you're the best one of the bunch, even when you're pissed at lunch. Kerry Roberts, you are just the bee's knees. We want the world of radio to know we'll miss you when you go. Kerry Roberts, we will miss you, and we really just want you to know that when God made Kerry Roberts, it was God's gift to radio. Kerry Roberts, Kerry Roberts, God's gift to radio.
Who would have known that way back in 1970, a scrawny little kid would arrive at 3AW in Melbourne to be trained as a panel operator? He skipped being an office boy. However, I was given that onerous task to do that. Not sure of my success at the time, but however, Kerry went on to great success and earned some stretch marks from giving birth to several radio stations and also steering others to great success from as far away as New Zealand. Now, keep in mind that there are many stories to tell, all of them embarrassing, so I know nothing.
Kerry Roberts is one of the best operators I've had the pleasure of working with. Some would say he's autocratic, it's my way or the highway. However, as a leader, he has tremendous judgment and is rarely wrong. He has taken 3 different radio stations in Perth to the top. He could easily become the CEO of one of the 3 major radio networks in Australia. But when the offers came, he had to knock them back because he couldn't leave Perth, the city that he loves. If he had accepted the CEO's job, he would have taken that network to the very top and done serious damage to his competitors. If you're passionate about radio, there's no better teacher than Gary Roberts.
Hi, my name's David, and I've known Gary Roberts for nearly 40 years, which is pretty scary for both of us, I guess. Gary Roberts is an exceptional radio person. He combines a programmer's ability to craft a great station together with a commercial director's ability to monetize the business without compromising the product. That's a very rare combination. Gary's got a great ear for what it takes to make a station sound brilliant.
Gary Roberts. Yes, Gary Roberts. Well, what can you say about Gary? Beautiful hair, cars, beautiful wine, trophy wife with a personality. Hello, Wendy. Mate, a lot of great memories working with you over the years. Not a problem at all. It's been an absolute thrill. I was actually hoping to work with you again at some stage, but if you keep throwing yourself upstairs, chances of that happening aren't real special, actually. But stay well, mate. Hopefully catch you soon.
When I worked with him in Perth back in the mid to late 90s, I got to see, obviously, the radio man, and there's a lot being said about that, and he is an incredible radio person, and obviously the brand that he created in Perth with 96 FM was phenomenal, and the success that he's had subsequently with 94.5 and also now Nova. But I worked with him when Jack Bendad owned the two stations, the first duopoly in Perth, and I got to see that behind the myth, so to speak, is a man who is a true leader of people, and a man who has an incredible amount of empathy and compassion for his team of people, and they really are fiercely loyal to him. And as I got to know him, I got to understand that there's a lot more depth to Gary than you would perhaps first think. I'm very pleased that throughout my career, I've met lots of people and I've learned a lot from lots of people, but I'm very pleased to have met Gary Roberts and to have worked with him and to have witnessed his unique and very obvious leadership qualities, which are to be admired. So there's Gary Roberts, the radio man, and Gary Roberts, the man. Both are pretty impressive.
How do you describe the amazingness that is Gary Roberts? I think it was the great Salt and Pepper who said, "What a man, what a man, what a mighty good man." You know, Gary Roberts gave me what's probably the best piece of advice I've ever received. During a low point, he believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. And he said to me, quite sternly, "Fake it till you make it." And I did. And I did. I mean, really, that piece of advice affected the whole bigger picture of my life and the way that I would get to live it. So, what a man.
Gary is without doubt the best radio operator in this country, bar none, and he has been for decades. He's also one of the best businessmen that I've ever come across. Gary has been my mentor, although he doesn't even know it. He's been my mentor for at least a couple of decades. Not only professionally, but probably personally as well. I've learned so much from Gary. But above all the business acumen, all of the professional stuff that Gary has taught me without him even knowing, I think what I treasure the most is Gary's friendship. He's without doubt, I can count on one hand how many close, really, really close friends that I have. And that's where Gary sits. He is very, very dear to me.
He's one of the men that a gentleman's handshake is his word and it's a contract. He's one of the very last, and I know that it hasn't been given to him as he would give it to others in his time. He's never been handed anything. He's worked really hard for everything he has got, and I'm really proud of that. But he's had a very good life, and it was probably only the last year that I saw him get tested physically and emotionally and mentally for the first time. And I've got to say, like the past 30 years of working with him, he never disappointed me either. He worked twice as hard as anyone hoped. He beat everyone's expectations. And yet again, I was so proud of him. it's been a privilege to work for him, to be his friend, and to have someone so strong and genuine actually be a part of all my life.
G'day from the big island of Hawaii. My Gary Roberts experience goes back 45 years. He and I, over the years, have found ourselves in a bunch of varying positions. I've worked against Gary. In Adelaide, we were both on the air. He was at the powerhouse 5AD and I was at the then struggling 5KA. I've worked with Gary. We were both on the air together at the infamous 6KY, and I've worked for Gary twice. First in Brisbane at 4IP, where we both got fired, and then at 92.9 KY 94.5, where he fired me. All good though. During my time at the duopoly in Perth, I learnt a hell of a lot. I got a couple of very vivid lessons in pragmatism. I learnt a whole bunch of things about being a content director and focusing on the bottom line. The thing about my Perth experience was it was the first time I'd worked for a station where the promotions department was a profit centre, not a loss centre, the fabulous contingency. And also I was taken by Gary's almost anal attention to collections. Both of these things wound up helping me a lot later on in my career. He probably doesn't know it, but he inadvertently set me up for a whole new career adventure and the development of a whole bunch of new skill sets in Asia. And finally, of course, that brought me to ownership in the US. And so there's a lot more tension when it's your money. That's all I can say. So aloha, my friend, and mahalo.
Gary, I've worked for you since I'm 17. You've helped shape me into the man I am today. That might not be a good thing, but you've been a father figure to me, and I couldn't imagine working for anybody else. You've been amazing. Thank you.
Hey, Gary, I want to thank you for all you've done for me and my life. I'd like to thank God and particularly Gary Roberts, because without you, I'm not complete. You complete me. Thanks, Gary. That's what you'd say. Good on you, Paul.
He always had perfect iron shirts. I actually thought he had shares in a dry cleaners at one point because he was always immaculate, even on the weekends. You know, sometimes I'd go in the weekend to do a bit of work and I'd be wearing a t-shirt like most of the other people, and Gary'd be in there with his white shirt, perfectly ironed, incredible.
So yeah, sharing birthdays with Gary has been wonderful over the years because everybody sucks up to the boss and nobody even notices me. Half the time my name's not even on the cake. Anyway, it's been great, Gary. It's been great.
It was great working with you over all those years since the early 90s, with many station name and ownership changes, all part of colourful Perth radio history, as indeed you are. With all the obvious and well-deserved respect from everybody around you, and you being the perfect gentleman and unflappable through all those daily dramas. I do remember wonderful hospitality in the evenings on our visits from the east, and staying up late, only late evening in Perth time, but in the early hours of Eastern time, which is a very pleasant and effective way to wear down those head office types. All the best. Take care. Cheers.
Hey Gary, I don't know, 25, 26 years, too many years really to be counting, and we have to stay best friends because otherwise I'd have to kill you because you'd have too many secrets. Love you.
Gary, you make this place a fabulous place to work, and I really mean that. I've recently worked at other places, and nothing is like Nova.
Gary Roberts' best feature was buying the Porsche. Gary Roberts' worst feature was selling the Porsche. That's it, just about the Porsche, owning the Porsche.
Have you seen his handwriting? It is absolutely spectacular. When we were at 96 FM in the 80s, one Monday, I asked him what he'd done on the weekend, and he said he'd done a calligraphy course. Now, I can tell you, if you've seen his handwriting, and at the time if you'd seen it, the last person who needed to do a calligraphy course was Gary. I can tell you it was perfect.
On Valentine's Day, he used to give all the ladies in the office a single red rose. And I thought to myself, either this guy's a huge player or I don't know. But in the end, I worked out Gary was just a very classy guy. And I think most people would agree that Gary single-handedly redefined the Perth radio landscape in the 80s with 96 FM. We all learned a lot from Gary.
So many things I like about Gary. Number one, I'd have to say the fact that he wears his pants right up to his armpits. Very, very stylish, I would say, Gary. One thing I do like about Gary is his deep voice as well. I know a lot of people would. I often think about how big his balls may be. Good on you, Gaz.
Yeah, look, Gary Roberts. Well, Gary gave me a start in radio, originally with 96 FM and now with Mix 94.5. And who would have thought 27 years later I'd still be here. I always remember Gary saying to me that the reason I work is because I'm unprofessional. Now, that was a compliment. He said I was just like one of the punters, untrained, and that's why they related to me. He was so good at building a team. He was just fantastic at that, and we had such a great time with all the years that I worked with him. I just loved the fact that he was so supportive of me and my career. He's a good man.
Gary, I've worked for you pretty much my entire life, adult life. Been brilliant, thank you. It's excellent.
Now, Gary, I know there's a CRA Hall of Fame, but mate, you are in my Hall of Fame. You are one of the all-time greats.
Okay, so Gary, of course, is a personal hero of mine. He gave me my job here, and without that, I'd be going through his bins looking for food. So, I enjoy so many things about Gary. One major thing is that he looks like Dame Judi Dench, but he has slightly smaller testicles than her. I also like the fact that Gary has so much money that I'm sure he has a private plane built somewhere and hidden in Netherlands. And one day, if I say enough nice things about him, he'll let me on it. I love you, Gary. You silver fox.
There's hardly a day that goes by that you don't learn something from Gary. Sometimes something little, sometimes something big. Sometimes within a few minutes of him mentioning it, sometimes a few hours. And sometimes, in fact, a few years later, the words will come back to you and haunt you and you'll think, damn it, he was right again. But you know what? I actually genuinely wouldn't trade it for anything. I love the time that we get to spend together. I love what we do and what we get to create, and I love that I get to do that with a man like Gary Roberts. I hope that we get to do it for many, many more years to come. In fact, I think he's a little bit misunderstood. He's a hard taskmaster, he knows what he wants, and if he doesn't get it, he will absolutely crack the shits. But at the same time, he's a really rewarding boss, and one who looks out for his staff and defends them above all else. It's interesting when I walk into the office every day. If I get past his desk, then it's going to be an okay day. And if he utters the words, Mr. Program Director, then it's not necessarily going to be a good day, and maybe I should just turn around and go home.
Gary Roberts and I go back a long way. In 1973, he was a nights presenter on 5AD. I was on 5KA. I got to know Gary as a professional contemporary. Little did I know that I'd be co-opted to do the John Laws show in 1974 at 2UW. And Gary was wonderful to me because he got a job at 2UW. He was working nights at the time, I think 7 till 10. And I was able to stay with him for a reasonable amount of time as a guest. And he absolutely nurtured me and helped me through what was a very challenging time, one that I really enjoyed. But over the years, I've kept in contact with Gary Roberts. He's been an absolute inspiration. He's one of the great radio people. He has a great feel for not only the people around him, and I think his ability to deal with them is exemplary, but he's got a great radio head, and he's a dear friend and somebody I will never forget.
The fact that he has no filter, and I have to keep telling him, Gary, you can't say that shit to HR.
People used to say Gary's a control freak, and all this kind of stuff. And, you know, Gary knew what he wanted, and I can remember having spirited debates with Gary from time to time. And he would always listen. He would always, you know, criticize me afterwards, but he'd always be right, usually. Anyway, I know Gary likes his red wine, so do I, so here's the Gary.
When we got together and started working together about 18 years ago, I was the bad guy sent over from Austereo to Austereo-ise this Perth mob, and Gary wasn't looking forward to that, and things weren't easy for a little while until we got to know each other. And I realised over quite a few years that Gary and I were actually quite similar, both professionally and personally. In my head, he may not agree, but I do. We manage teams similarly, and personally, we are actually a pretty introverted people, which makes us just look arrogant, basically. But I know Gary likes that, and I do too.
Gary, if you can read this, you've died. Okay. How are you, old friend? Mate, we've known each other for, I think, 22 years or something like that now, and you're a wonderful, wonderful boss. But one of the great things that you bring is this great sense of humour. You have just a wonderful sense of humour and a great light-hearted attitude to good times. I mean, you love having a good time. And we grew up very close. You grew up in Blackburn, I grew up in Heathmont, mate. We're old Eastern Melbourne boys, and we know how to have a good time. And I really appreciate all the great years we were working together. And of course, I would love to work with you again sometime, but it's about time you freaking retired, because, you know, I don't know, have you been in radio since the Vietnam War? Or maybe since the French owned Vietnam? Is it probably even further back than that? But anyway, mate, I love you, Gary, and much love to you and the family. And all the best, mate. Gary Roberts. Okay.
Oh, this is not about me, this is about Gary. Gary is the heart and soul of radio in WA and Nova in particular. He's the best people manager I've ever met. He encourages and supports his staff. He gets into the trenches when he has to. He instills belief. He backs us in. He leads by example. He's truly inspirational and passionate and highly regarded in the Perth media and the wider business community. Gary is warm and caring and very genuine. He's quick to recognise and acknowledge all those who come into his space. He's had a big impact on my life. Gary loves Perth and prides himself in knowing all of the newer suburbs like Sanagra, Brabham, Lexia, Pearsall and Dayton. Just ask and he'll point you in the right direction. Gary loves his BMWs, not so much when they break down though in Balcatta on a busy road with clients and staff looking on. He made arrangements for everyone to get back to work whilst he stayed with his prized Series 7 Beamer for hours, getting sunburnt and on the edge of hitchhiking. And he really cares about Mercs as well, especially when they break down in Nedlands, much closer to home, and it costs $640 for a new battery. Only Gary would pay $640 for a new battery. And I recall the ironing story. Yes, in their early life together, Wendy did the ironing. That included Gary's shirts, but Gary wasn't happy with the result. He would re-iron his shirts. Wendy eventually found out, and ever since, Gary irons his own shirts. He's now such an expert at ironing, he insists on ironing the family sheets and tea towels as well. Go, Gary. He's a dear friend and colleague. He's just a champion bloke, hugely admired, respected, teased, pranked, but most of all, genuinely loved by all of us at Nova. Here's to you, Gary, your favourite drop. Cheers.
Life started in Melbourne. I grew up in Ivanhoe, went to school at Heidelberg High, and left school because I hated it, to be quite honest. I didn't feel I was learning the things that I wanted to know, so I got out. And that's how I ended up in radio, strangely enough. Started at 3AW as their office boy, which lasted 3 weeks before they made me a panel operator. And I thought it was actually incredibly fascinating and really loved working there. And it was somewhat inevitable that I would end up where I was, because when I was panelling, all the guys on the air would say to me, "You've got a great voice, you should be on the air." I'd never thought about being on the air, to be quite honest. I could do everything on the air except talk. And as a bit of humour, Mickey Dalton was working there at the same time. And he said, "Well, let's put a tape together and send it off and see what happens." So there was an ad in the BNT for an announcer at 2BE in Bega, which is no longer 2BE, by the way. So we put a tape together and I sent it off, and got a telegram, that's how long ago it was, to tell me, "Congratulations, you've got a job." And it was sort of like I was 17 years old, hadn't told my parents that I would consider leaving home to be a disc jockey. They were not exactly thrilled when I went home and told them. However, I also didn't have a licence at that stage because I hadn't turned 18. I was more than capable of driving, but I didn't have a licence. So they drove me to Bega and dropped me off. My mother cried all the way from Melbourne to Bega, and then apparently all the way from Bega to Sydney, where they headed off to. And so that was my first on-air career, was in Bega. I spent the better part of 12 months there. Can't believe that they actually took me off afternoons and put me in breakfast in about 3 weeks. God knows what I was doing as a breakfast announcer at that age. Then they were paying me the huge amount of $30 a week in those days. And I applied for the next job, which was the launch of 8HA in Alice Springs. And they actually more than doubled my salary. I was getting $70 a week there, which was pretty fabulous. But I'd never been to Alice Springs, but I thought this is a good idea, launching a brand new radio station. So I went off to 8HA, and I was the first person on the air at 8HA in Alice Springs. Lasted less than 12 months there before I was offered a job at 2WL in Wollongong. Went to Wollongong, got conscripted into the army, which was pretty frightening at the time. But I got thrown out when I went for my medical because my frame was too small for my height, which was somewhat fantastic. As it would have turned out, I would have made it just literally driven through the gate into the army when Labor were elected, and conscription got cancelled at that stage. So I would never have actually spent any time in the army anyway. But from Wollongong, I moved to 5AD in Adelaide, and that was a pretty fabulous time up until I had a full-blown brawl with the program director, who I watched beating up his girlfriend. And when I actually stopped that, he got rather upset with me and decided I would move on to Midnight to Dawns, which I was somewhat upset about. And we had a fight in the manager's office. His name I can't remember, to be quite honest. And then I literally walked out of the station. As I walked into the house that we were renting, the phone was ringing. I picked up the phone, and it was the program director of TUW in Sydney who offered me a job. And like, the timing on this was just unbelievable. And I went, "I'm definitely coming." Couldn't understand why they even knew about me. I hadn't applied for a job. Like, how would they know that I was on air in Adelaide? So I asked them the question, "How did you get this tape of me?" And they said, "Paul Thompson." And that stage, Paul Thompson was running 5KA in Adelaide. So I phoned him and said, "Can I come around and have a chat?" I hadn't even met him. And he said, "Sure." So I walked around to thank him for getting me a job at 2UW in Sydney. And we had a really good chat, and it was amazing timing. So there I was. I hadn't even turned 21, and I was on air in Sydney, which was ridiculous. I shouldn't have been there. In all honesty, I wasn't at that level, or shouldn't have been at that level at that stage. Lasted a couple of years there, and with the likes of John Laws on the air. That was interesting. Malcolm T. Elliott, that was interesting. And some other interesting people that worked on air there at that stage. After 2UW, I came to Perth for the first time, doing mornings on 6KY. So I was doing nights in Sydney, doing mornings here in Perth. They decided to change format from being a top 40 station to being a very bizarre soft station run off a computer known as the fucking ridiculous electronic device, which if you want to see, you can look on YouTube, and there it is.
The way radio was. And in 1976, at radio station 6KY in Perth, the way radio is in this century. This dramatic contrast in radio broadcasting at 6KY is all accomplished with the help of Fred, the most modern and surprisingly simple to operate Schaefer system designed and built in the United States. Fred, or the Schaefer 903E, is the epitome of sophisticated equipment, offering the alternative of manual and completely automatic operation. The Schaefer 903E stores 3,871 recyclable format events, which can be divided into as many sub-formats as desired, or programmed in straight line fashion for random access cartridge music selections. This system can provide 3 days of time-related avails, 60 per hour for 72 hours. Enough to pre-program all commercials, music, newscasts, and other time-orientated events over a weekend or 3 days in advance.
And it was quite bizarre that two guys turned up from America and we had to audition for the jobs we had. So I sat down and did the worst audition you can possibly imagine. They thought I was fantastic because they loved my voice. And I got to keep my job. What they didn't know is I was already applying for jobs elsewhere, which was up the road at 6IX, which was owned by Channel 7. They appointed me as music director and doing Drive. However, it wasn't long before they decided I should be a duo, that sort of worked out pretty well up until we got sacked for apparently being too rude on the air, which was really a bit of an exaggeration. It was a power demonstration for Rod Muir, who was a consultant at that stage to 6IX, and the then managing director of Channel 7 thought he'd just show him who was the power player. So we got first of all suspended, then we were told about a week later that our services were no longer required, which we sort of went, well, that was really weird because we were doing exactly what we were told to do, and then we found out how it all played out. So I really didn't deserve to be sacked. However, as it turned out, it worked out to be quite brilliant. I was earning enough money doing voice work to pay our mortgage at the time. Wendy and I had bought our first house, and Wendy was working, and I was making enough money out of voice work, which only required me to do about 2 things a week. The rest of the time I was, playing around doing dumb stuff. And there was a job that came up, which was a program director's job. So I applied for it and got it in a flash. So it was my first programming job at 2NX in Newcastle. And I joined the 2SM group, which was the hottest radio group in the country at that stage. But I was something of an anomaly because I didn't necessarily agree with everything that they were pushing, and that made some interesting times. But I was at 2NX for 12 months. We wrote 2 record surveys for the station, changed the lineup, and it was really cooking along very nicely. We bought a house in Newcastle, which was a lovely house. It was a 3-story terrace, and it was just beautiful. Subsequently got destroyed by an earthquake, but that's another story. We weren't there. And I was then approached and they said, would you fly up to Brisbane? We want you to have a listen to 4AP and tell us what you think. So jumped on a plane, went up, listened to it. God, it had some problems. So I wrote a report on it, went back to Newcastle, sent them the report. They said, great, thanks for that, very accurate. Okay, we'll fix those problems. And a couple of weeks later, they called me again and said, would you mind going back up to Brisbane to have another listen to see what you think now? So I did it again, wrote the same report saying it's still bloody awful. There's a lot of problems that need to be resolved. I thought we actually wrote about this before, at which stage John Torv said to me, congratulations, we want you to go to Brisbane, which my ego was out of control as usual. And so off we went to Bris Vegas, only to discover I hadn't asked enough questions before I accepted the role. The most important was that I couldn't change anything. So the lineup on the air, which was a major problem, a lot of what was going on internally, a major problem, I wasn't allowed to address. And it was like, oh my God, I go in to meet the manager, and he was an interesting character. He watched me come through the door, he opened the drawer on his desk and pulled out a handful of pills and threw them down his throat before he even said hello to me. And I was sort of like, I don't think I've seen this before. It's a bit weird. So he wanted to know my background because he didn't know much about me, which was somewhat surprising. Anyway, it was going to be clear that he and I weren't going to get along that well, and it wasn't long before I decided this was not going to work out. I couldn't change anything. There were too many issues to try and fix, and I was told by the 2SM group, and particularly John Torv at that stage, that don't worry, you know, all of this will be resolved. You'll get to do what you need to do. You know, we're backing you. We're not backing anyone else there. So I got told that 3 times. And then it was almost 12 months, and I was called into the manager's office, who said, I'm sacking you. And I went, does Sydney know about this? And he said, yes. And I said, well, congratulations, it was supposed to be you. And the colour drained from his face, and I walked out, phoned Sydney and said, what the? Can you explain this to me? Because this is not what we agreed on. I would have left a long time ago if this is the way this is going to play out. And they said, oh, well, he hasn't got enough rope to hang himself yet, but he will, and it won't be long. But in the meantime, you know, you have to go. And I went, well, consider me gone permanently, because if this is the way you play the games, I don't want to play. I jumped on a plane, went down to Melbourne and Sydney, saw everyone I knew, looking for a job, and by the time I got back to Brisbane, which was inside, I don't know, 3 or 4 days, Derek Lowe from Radio Hauraki was there to talk to me, which is not something that I anticipated, and certainly I wasn't looking for a job in New Zealand. And we spent a better part of 2 days talking, and we got along really well. It was really positive discussion, and we had a lot of funny time together. I drove him to the airport and to put him on the plane to go back to Auckland, and he gave me a book, which was The Shoestring Pirates, and he said, I'd like you to read the book. So I got home, he flew off. I read the book until 3 o'clock that morning. The book was fascinating. It was just a fabulous history of the radio station, and I really enjoyed it. Went to bed, woke up the next morning. He called and said, when are you starting? I said, you bastard, you knew if you gave me that book, I'd be involved. So I accepted the job, and off I went to Auckland. Arrived there, his brief to me before I left Australia was, Gary, all you got to do is maintain a #1 radio station. And I went, fabulous, okay, that's fine, I reckon I can do that. And the day before I arrived, it went down 8%. So I didn't know that until I got there. So I've landed, found out, and went, oh shit, this is going to be interesting. And at that stage, Derek was away for 2 weeks, and 2 guys who were running a sales department arrived at the hotel I was staying at to see where my head was at and whose side I'd be on, because there was a small revolution going on. So I said, well, I came here for Derek Lowe, so I don't think I'm even going to answer any questions. Let's make this simple. I'm here to work with Derek. Whatever you guys are doing, you go and do what you're doing, just don't include me in it. So that was on a Saturday. On the Monday, I rolled into work in Celtic's house. And yes, the mini revolution was on, but I was the program director. I'm not buying into any of this. I'm meeting the people. And I phoned Wendy and said, do not get on a plane. Keep the car off the wharf. We're not shipping anything over until this gets sorted. And it was 2 weeks later that Derek got back. I'd spoken to him before. That was on a Sunday. I spoke to him, and on the Monday I said, I don't know what you've got to do, but this has got to be resolved one way or the other. And he said, I'll fix it. He walked in, he lined up the entire staff, shot these 2 guys in front of them, and said, anybody else want to join them? they left. And Derek demonstrated very clearly who was running Radio Hauraki, and he was an amazing guy to work with. I thoroughly enjoyed the time that I was there. I learnt so much. I thought I was going to teach them. I learnt a lot. There was also things that I actually contributed, but I really learned a lot about how radio can be put together differently from the way it was done in Australia. And Wendy and I decided we were going to stay in New Zealand. I was in the process of buying a house again. We were standing in line for adoption because we were told we couldn't have children, and everything was going incredibly well. We built the station back to number one. And we were having a great time, great team of people. And there's a whole bunch of stories there that I won't bother going into, but I was then approached about coming back to Australia to launch FM, but still to come back to Perth to launch FM. And it was just way too tempting. I flew across to Sydney, sat down with George Chapman, had a long chat, and it was like I accepted the job on the spot. And that was a cut in salary, so that wasn't exactly the smartest thing I've ever done. I flew back, went to see Derek to tell him what I was doing. He was mortified, and he said, "I'll double your salary straight away." And I went, "Derek, please don't do that. And if you tell Wendy, I'll have to kill you because she'll want to stay on that basis." And he went, "Mate, this has been fantastic, and we're in such a good place. I just don't want you to go." I said, "Look, if it wasn't for the fact that it was Perth and was launching FM in Australia, I wouldn't be going anywhere because, this is pretty fabulous." So we went. We came back to Perth, and literally by the time I got here, I'd only employed 2 people, had to find a team to put to air and build the programming component of it. Inside 3 weeks was what I actually had. I said, "You can make this 4 weeks, I might be able to do it. I can't do it in 3. That's just ridiculous because we've got nothing." We managed to get the station to air in 4 weeks, even though we had to change all the signage around town announcing it would be on the air August 1. We changed it to August 8 and we got away. I'm not sure that I slept for the better part of 4 weeks. It was just an incredible period, and it was such a great achievement to get it to air with the right lineup, with the right format, which no one believed would work. And in a very short period of time, we debuted with a 12.9, with the number 1 FM station in the country by a mile with what we debuted with, and we managed to keep that solid for a very long period of time until we got it to number 1 in 1985 after being incredibly successful over that period of time anyway. Certainly we totally dominated our core audience, and the only thing that we weren't number 1 in effectively was breakfast. And we actually got that to number 1 as well. And we subsequently ran a lot of very successful number 1 surveys. In fact, we then ran 31 number 1 surveys before it came to an end. Now, it only came to an end simply because the station was sold, which I was very grateful for because I was a shareholder, as were all the original staff members. And I took the second batch that came around as well. So we were literally able to pay off our mortgage, which put us in a very comfortable place for a long period of time. And when it was sold the first time, it was resold and then ended up with the wrong people who were so in debt because they managed to pay too much on the East Coast for the rest of the stations that they managed to purchase. And they were doing some, what I considered to be inappropriate things internally. I was general manager from 1984, and this was up to it started to get turned to shit really around 1990. And we did our best to try and keep it going, but it just got sillier and sillier to the point where I decided it was time to leave because they were sending me overnight bags of paperwork to sign, and I'd send it back unsigned because there was no way I was signing what I considered to be illegal. And someone would end up being the sacrificial lamb, and it wasn't going to be me under any circumstances. I just kept sending the paperwork back, and they'd ring me up and say, "Why didn't you sign?" I'd say, "Well, it's pretty obvious. I read it. Do you think I'm going to sign that?" So I know I'd upset them quite a bit, but when I came to resign, it was really, it really hurt, because it was 12 years of my life building a great radio station with a great team of people, and I really didn't want to leave them. At the same time, I'd been approached by Jack Bendat to do what is now Mix 94.5, but in those days was 94.5 KYFM. And I didn't really want to work with Jack, to be quite honest. Trust was an issue. And we drew up a contract which, in fact, broke the law, so it had to be redone again, but it gave me control of the station. And the commitment that I made to Jack was there'll only be two people on the board, you and me. You're the chair, I'm the managing director, that's it. There's no one else on the board. I don't want you sitting there every day. You're welcome to come into the radio station whenever you like, but you don't come in and run it on a daily basis. Happy to take a call from you at any time, but we'll do the monthly report. I'll tell you everything you need to know at that stage. In the meantime, we'll be turning it around, and there'll be a lot of change. So he said, that's fine. I arrived, immediately went on a cruise and left town, which was perfect timing. So we started to turn it around very rapidly, and there were a number of people I thought I would be shooting when I got through the door. And what I found out was really they had no direction and no understanding of what needed to be achieved. So we put it together and we turned it around very quickly. Ian Cameron was there at that stage, but he had already set himself up to run for Parliament, which was really disappointing because I thought he was a great talent. I thought we could really build the great breakfast show around Ian. And we actually had a lot of fun up until he left, having been successful running for Parliament. And that's when Fred arrived, so things got a lot better.
Tomorrow, one Perth radio station will give away $10,000 cash. All you need to win is a phone and a stereo tuned to the station that plays one great song after another. 94.5.
And what we did musically with the station, what we did promotionally with the station, turned it around quite significantly. And suddenly what was a station that was losing money, it actually took me less than 3 months to put it in profit. And then we grew it very quickly into a very successful, very profitable radio station. And it was only 18 months later when the legislation was passing that you could own two stations in a market. And as soon as it happened, I said to Jack, I hate this. I don't think we should be able to own two stations, but we've got to buy one, otherwise we'll be victims. He said, we should buy PM. And I went, yep, that's what we should buy. So we did, and went and paid $18 million for it, which was a steal with hindsight. And then we had the two stations, which meant we controlled formatically what was going on the market. We weren't initially going to put them together, and then it became bloody obvious that we should. So the two stations got put together in Rockaby Road in Subiaco. And I can tell you, when I walked through the door at PM, they were not happy to see me. Like, I'd been the problem that was at 96, then I was the problem that was at 94, and suddenly I was there. But very quickly we turned it into the station it needed to be, with the right people, and it was incredibly successful. So successful that at that stage I was had been a director of FARB, which was to become CRA, and bugger me dead, before you know it, I ended up being the chairman, which hadn't happened before. So I was the first chairman from WA in Australian history. So and I was chair for 3 years, and during that period of time, Peter Harvey from Austereo and I were getting along incredibly well. We'd see one another at all those meetings, and he said to me, we want to buy them. And I went, well, they're not for sale. And he said, well, you know, what's the price? And I said, well, I'm telling you, they're not for sale. We're not interested in selling. I don't think Jack would be the least bit interested in selling because he's rather enjoying the fact that they're having a lot of success and he's getting all the credit. So I'm not sure that he would actually be that happy about selling. So I came back and talked to Jack, and at that stage, my contract was actually expiring. And so he wanted to talk to me about how my remuneration would be built against station value rather than turnover, because that had got pretty damn good. And we were still talking about that, and we figured the stations were worth between 60 and 70. That was real market value. And so I held another talk with Peter Harvey, and I said, mate, not interested in talking at market value. You know, that's all you've got. Forget it. They owned 96 at that time. And he said, oh, okay then. So they spent somewhere between $2 and $3 million promoting 96 to run against us and made no progress whatsoever in the following 12 months. And then we had another, I said, look, the only way you'll get these is you put 100 mil on the table. That's what Jack will, you know, that's what he'll take. And that would be stupid if you did that. Bugger me dead, he says, you've got the 100 mil. So I fly back and see Jack and say, Jack, Santa Claus just arrived. They're happy to pay 100 mil for it. And he went, what do you want to do? I said, well, I don't want to sell. You know, we've got 2 great stations, a great team of people. Why would we sell this? But you're the owner. This is a hell of a return on your investment, and it's $100 million. And I doubt anyone else will turn up at the door with $100 million anytime soon. So I made the decision to sell, at which stage I didn't want to work for Austereo, but they weren't going to buy it unless I was part of the deal. So it sort of went on for a little while until I finally agreed. And that was basically on the same deal that allegedly Jack had done with me, which, because it wasn't in writing, didn't come to fruition. So that was a very disappointing outcome. So I stayed to work for Austereo as managing director of the 2 stations, and I was promised this would be mine totally. They wouldn't interfere. The way it was running was perfect. They were really happy with it. It was, you know, fantastic in terms of, you know, it was running at that stage in the early 50s in terms of an EBITDA, and no one was doing that well. So they actually initially accused me of the wrong, you know, cheating. There's something wrong with the books. We don't believe this. And I said, we don't cheat. These are real books. I can guarantee you that. And when they went through them, they're still going, how do you do this? I went, well, we run it efficiently. I would have thought that was pretty obvious. Anyway, after about 3 months, I resigned for the first time. I just said to Peter, I can't work with these people. You know, you've got some real cowboys, you know, on the programming side, and now you've got a managing director who's got a few problems. So I don't want to be part of this. Anyway, I managed to resign 3 times and ended up staying for a total of 5 years. When I said, that's it, I really cannot do this anymore. When somebody has to walk into my office and do a line of coke before they can talk to me, I think there's a problem. I know I can be a pain in the ass, but Jesus, a line of coke to talk to me? Get out of here. Anyway, so when I left, I'd already had a number of conversations with Paul Thompson. I said, I can't do anything until I leave because legally I'm locked away until June 30, but at that stage I'm gone. Happy to have a chat after that. But I'm going to Italy. Wendy and I are going on holiday. He said, as soon as you get back, would you come to Adelaide to talk? And I went, sure, which I did. And we worked out an arrangement which put me in charge of Nova in Perth to launch it. And I literally walked through the door with nothing. We didn't have a table. We didn't have a phone. We had nothing. I very quickly hired 6 people who walked through the door with me, who desperately wanted to be part of it. And we built the station, and it was on the air within 6 months. We went to air on December 5, 2002.
Welcome aboard our first bondage flight. The Gimp will be making his way through the plane shortly. Assume the position.
we got the station off the block very quickly and very successfully, and here we are. You know, I've been with this company now, remarkably, the longest I've ever worked for anyone. We'll be coming up for 15 years in July, which is only a couple of months away. So it's been an incredible run, and I've got a fabulous team of people. The station has been very successful. I've got a breakfast team that's been together for almost that entire period of time. They've got the most listeners in the Perth market and have done for quite some period of time. And things are pretty good. So there's a summary of the history to this point. There's lots of stories in between, but God help you. Wendy, I met when I was on air at 2UW in Sydney, and I was not looking for a wife, let alone another girlfriend. I met her at the Boulevard Hotel at a function. When I walked in, I took one look across the room, saw her, and thought, well, she's by far and away the most attractive woman here. I'll go and have a talk to her, because I was by myself. And that's where that started. And we were living within walking distance of one another in Sydney. And we just, I wasn't looking, as I said, for a wife or another girlfriend. I seem to have enough of those already. And she knows that. It's not a news story to her, because all my friends told her what a prick I was, which wasn't helpful. And she came to Perth with me. We just were in love. There was no question about that. And we decided, I proposed to her very badly on the phone when she was in Sydney doing some training with the company she was working for, and I was on air here in Perth when I did it. Dreadful story, shouldn't be mentioned. And when she came back, we decided we'd get married in our own lounge room, and we invited everyone. I hadn't met her parents at that stage. So they met me the day before we got married. My parents flew over. They'd met Wendy before. But we went ahead and got married. My grandmother was there. She was sitting outside by the pool watching some of our guests, mostly the gay guys actually, jumping in the pool without anything on. She thought it was fantastic. We'd left at that stage because we were supposed to go on a honeymoon. We should have stayed at the party, to be quite honest. But we went obviously from Perth to Newcastle to Brisbane to Auckland, and then came back to Perth. And renewed our wedding vows when I turned 40. And at that stage we had 2 children who we were told we wouldn't be able to have, but both were conceived by Wendy. And it was just fantastic that we actually ended up with 2 pretty fabulous children, who are now both in their 30s, so it's clearly a long time ago. And, you know, we're still in Perth. We were given the opportunity to leave a number of times, one particular to go to Melbourne. And we went over, we looked at schools, we looked at houses, and after we'd spent quite a few days looking, we got back on the plane, and Wendy said, so when are we going to leave? And she said, I'm not. I'm doing this for ego. I'm not doing it because it's where I want to be. I don't want to be in Melbourne to do the same job I'm doing in Perth. And if I can't do what I'm doing in Perth successfully, then, you know, that's a good reason to move. But I'm doing what I do. Here I am running the industry body out of WA. Why would I pack my bags and go? It doesn't make any sense. It's just something the company wants me to do. I'm not going to do it. So I didn't. So as a result, my kids got to go to high school here rather than, you know, a new school on the other side of the country, and, you know, developed careers that, you know, they were able to do in Perth. But they're not here anymore because Matt's now in Melbourne and Erin's on the Gold Coast, so that all changed anyway. I can't believe you lasted this long with me and that we're still together. And now we're past our official use-by age, and we're still here, and we're still together. We lead a pretty fabulous life. So I've loved you for a long period of time and always will. Now that you live on the Gold Coast, we hardly see you. You see more of my parents than you see of your parents. We love you, appreciate the fact that you've done what you wanted to do with your life. You're a jeweler and you're doing it very well. Congratulations. Love you, darling. Hope to see you again soon. The smartest little bastard on two legs, who's got this amazing brain and is able to read about anything and remember every single thing. He's such an intelligent, terrific guy who's developed into someone that I'm really proud of. And he's now with May. They live together, are perfect together. Someday they'll get married and do children, which will please them, your mother. Not necessarily me, because I'm not ready to be grandpa yet. But, you know, congratulations, mate, on an incredibly successful career to this point, and I know you're going to do a lot better. You actually have to be passionate about this industry. If you're not, this is not a place to be. It's tough. It always has been tough. It's never been easy. You know, we work hard and we play hard and we have a lot of fun, but not without working hard and not achieving. If the runs on the board don't match what's required and the revenue is not delivered, it's always going to be a very difficult environment to work in. I've never done anything else in my life. This is quite extraordinary that I've been in radio for as long as I have. I don't think anyone else has been this stupid. But I love what I do. I particularly love the people I work with. I'm very lucky to have a great team of people, and certainly since I've been able to build teams going back to the start of '96 to where we are now, I've just got incredible people, intelligent, enthusiastic, passionate, and they've achieved some great outcomes, and I wouldn't have done that without great people with me. And I appreciate the fact that I've been lucky enough to have great people. And I don't see an end to radio. There will be some people who tell you that, you know, radio is going to run out of steam somewhere. It won't. People have said that so many times since I've been in radio, and we just get better and better at what we do and more relevant. And as long as we remain local and focused in our respective markets, we'll be fine. I don't talk about myself a hell of a lot, and in fact I avoid it. Because most people who work here don't know a lot about my history. And nor do I walk around telling people about. The only place people can find out about me is on Wikipedia, and I didn't put it there. That's one of those things, you know, it's sort of like, because, you know, particularly new people to the industry, they don't know my background, and they sort of go, like, you've been just running Nova. That's it. They don't know what I did before that. So it's sort of interesting, and when you actually get to talk to people about it, they sort of go, really? You've been around that long? Yeah, I have been. And it's, you know, I can't actually go, there are other people like me who have been around as long as I have who are still here. I seem to be the only one, and I got told yesterday I'm the oldest and longest serving person in media in WA, and I went, oops, I think that's right. Jesus, what happened to the rest of the poor bastards? Anyway, so there.
Kerry Roberts, you're the top of the tops. Your shirts are just so neatly pressed. You're always so divinely dressed. Kerry Roberts, how we love you, and we really don't want you to go. So from all of us at our stereo, never pissed at lunch. Gary Roberts, you are just the bee's knees. We want the world of radio to know we'll miss you when you go. Gary Roberts,